Good morning. Today is Friday, February 21st. It is 8:53. This is House Commerce and Economic Development, and we are here with our intern, Mark Graves. Good morning.
Morning, everyone. Good to be back with you guys again. I will go ahead and get started. My report again, for the record, I'm Helen R. Graves, the legislative intern for the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee this session, and a senior at the University of Vermont. I'm reporting this week on the activity in the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. And overall, a lot of work this week focused on specific bills, particularly related to labor. New bills in committee include S67, an act relating to increasing the state minimum wage based on the livable wage. S70, an act relating to data brokers and personal information. S71, an act relating to consumer data privacy and online surveillance. And S78, an act relating to the creation of the Vermont Ireland Trade Commission. In terms of the bills discussed in committee this week, they started off with Bill S6, which is an act relating to repealing the Commissioner of Labor's authority to recommend a sub-minimum wage for individuals with a disability. That is something that it does not seem poses any difficulties on the end of the Department of Labor. So they are going to move forward. I believe it's going to be included in the Department of Labor's technical adjustments bill. I don't know if that has a specific name yet, but it was something that was discussed. So I think it's going to be rolled in to that. One of the things brought up, the original intent for the ability of the commissioner to recommend a sub-minimum wage for disability historically was based on post-World War II veterans who came back with a disability, and it was a way to introduce them back into the workforce and encourage employers to take them on. So Senator Weeks just wanted to make sure that there won't be an adverse effect down the road. I think he was looking for some testimony to that effect. But as of right now, it's continuing to move forward. S37 was next, and this seems to be, it was originally discussed, I believe, 2 weeks ago with the VTNEA, and it's the one that is related to unemployment insurance eligibility and benefits, particularly for support staff in Vermont schools. There are two key parts, and I think the first part came as somewhat of a surprise to the Senate committee because it sort of enlarges the groups implicated by the bill. It would allow employees protected by it to continue collecting unemployment insurance during seasonal unemployment, even if they were working another job. So if, for example, they were an independent contractor during summer months or off-season months, they would continue to collect that payment. And I don't believe it would affect their ability to collect unemployment insurance during that time as well. And this goes beyond just support staff. It includes any seasonal workers. I think there's some concern around that, given the fact that it would imply far larger costs than just the support staff part of the bill. So Senator Chittenden in particular said that he has some reservations and would like to hear from JFO on that. Senator Brock as well was hesitant. And I think the general consensus among the committee that the original intent for that bill was just UI for support staff. And so general hesitation on the first part. But the second part, again, continues with what the VTNEA discussed 2 weeks ago, which is allowing support staff to collect unemployment insurance when they're not being employed in schools. Further discussion later on in the week also included the senators requesting to hear testimony from support staff and to hear testimony to the effect that whether paraeducators would be included under instructional staff or the support staff. And it seems like the Department of Labor would be inclined to include them under the definition of instructional. And in addition to that, Michael Harrington from the DOL did recommend that it should be part of the larger conversation around school reform because it increased costs to schools and therefore to taxpayers. The JFO on Thursday estimated that it would cost about between 5.5 and 16 million a year to schools and therefore taxpayers. And the committee is moving forward to the extent that they're requesting to hear from the people in Minnesota who have enacted a similar bill. And then S67 was brought up, but briefly, that Senator Clarkson, Chair Clarkson is enthusiastic about the idea of raising the minimum wage to a sort of in between the urban and rural livable wages. But Senator Rem Hinsdale and Senator Brock both expressed that that would be much too heavy a lift. The committee has some history. They've tried to do something like that just for staff within the State House, I believe. And even then they couldn't get it very far. So they, Rem Hinsdale and Senator Brock both had strong opinions on that front. I don't believe it's going to go anywhere this session at least. Bill S34 was also discussed that pertains to allowing tenants of bless you, of mobile home park lots to contest landlords or the owners of the lots that they're renting, raising rents above 1% above the CPI. Currently, there's no limit, and tenants can contest at any amount that rent is raised. This bill would essentially cap that raise to that 1% above CPI. But there's discussion among the committee as to whether or not that would limit tenants to only being able to contest if that was raised above that 1% above CPI mark. In addition, I believe the rest of the bill information that was discussed was all a part of Senator Rem Hinsdale's workforce omnibus, which she briefly introduced a couple weeks ago. So there were sections 250652, or bill currently proposal 250652, which is relating to compensation, workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, and wage requirements for state construction projects. They did a walkthrough of this, and this would essentially remove the exclusion of agricultural workers from the minimum wage exemption in Vermont state law. It would also allow anyone making below $58,656 a year in salary eligible to receive overtime payment. One of the issues brought up was that it's difficult to get accurate data on what farm employers are paying some minimum wage and who is not, because they're not very willing to testify if they are not. So all the information that they have says that farm employers are paying minimum wage or above, but I believe I think it was 30 to 40% of migrant justice workers have said that they're paid below minimum wage. Section 3 of that bill would give employees the right to receive compensation for unused vacation time. Even if I believe they were dismissed for cause. See, it would also include health insurance in the wage equation. It would require employers to include that in the wages that they pay employees. And there is concern that that would inflate the cost to employers by a high amount given health care costs, health insurance costs in the state. Bill Proposal 250653. An act relating to employee rights was discussed briefly. David Mickenberg from Working Vermont went through the bill. He essentially describes it as a recruitment tool for the state in terms of workforce development. The bill includes 3 main components, and it requires that there must be a legitimate business reason for dismissing employees, because there's currently an at-will state for employers to dismiss. This is modeled after a bill in Montana, which is the only state that has done something similar, but it has been in place for decades. The second requirement would be a ban on non-competes. This is anticipation of the FDC rule being struck down regarding that. And the third is that it's essentially the right to sit at work. So essentially, if you have the ability to sit at work, you have the right to sit. And this is not currently enshrined in law in any way. So that is something that I believe the committee is fairly strongly opinionated about, and enthusiastic about as well. And finally, Senator Rumhensdale's bill 250654, an act relating to labor relations. And they had David McLean, Assistant Attorney General, in to testify. And he essentially described the motivation for this bill is, for him, the fact that many assistant attorney generals are, as he sees it, very underpaid for their work. And it ultimately is a retention issue for not just the Attorney General's office, but the State House in terms of legislative counsel. The idea that they can't necessarily provide a competitive wage for private industry. And the bill would essentially allow the unionization of supervisory legal staff, I believe, if I've understood correctly. It would I'm not sure if I've understood completely the concept behind it, but the goal is essentially to protect and support the staff at the Attorney General's office, those attorneys, and provide, stronger ability for them to advocate for themselves, to form union. And there is a component where currently unions, in order to certify one, you have to have a petition of 50% plus one of the union. But to decertify, you are only required to have 30% of the union petition. So the bill would also include a provision that put those on equal footing. So to decertify, you would also need to have 50% plus one. And this, David McLean says, would be to allow unions to focus on their work as opposed to constantly having to deal with decertification petitions. That is all I have to report this week. I'm happy to take questions if there are any. Thank you for listening to me.
Any questions for Colin? Great. Yeah, go ahead.
I think you mentioned, did they take testimony in H34 or
Only
was that
S.
a different issue?
I think it was S34.
S34, there we go.
Yes, not H34. H34, I don't believe is.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody have any reports on what's going on in other committees?
They talked to transportation. They are currently looking at the budget and trying to figure out how to rebalance the transportation fund. So they don't have really much that's crossing over for us right now. But
Health and Healthcare Committee is, I think we're working pretty hard on, addressing some of the healthcare inflation issues. I think the scene, again, I wasn't there, but just by the agenda, focus on reference-based pricing. So nothing specifically related to this committee, but obviously we've heard a lot from businesses around the pressures of healthcare inflation and their ability to business. So, I think they're hard at work.
Other committee reports?
Human Services spent most of the week working on H91, which is replacing the GA, with a new emergency homelessness program. And environment, I have connected. I never got like an official liaison, but I've assigned myself Kate Logan because she's really interested in climate workforce and also land use. So they did seem to do some work, and I'm connecting with Kate later today. Did some work on sort of forestry businesses, and so I should have more to report next week.
Ag, food resiliency and forestry. I'm in a similar situation. I don't have a formal liaison. I work with Greg Burt, among others. They had took budget presentation testimony from Secretary Tebbets for the overall package from Vermont Food Bank. And today they will be hearing from Forest Parks and Recreation on the budget. They had an introduction to a bill that will create changes to the structure of when you can take land out of current use if you're using it for sustainable housing. And there's another bill that does similar things too. So they're going to be taking testimony on both those, I believe. One thing that may be of interest to us is an Act H229 it relates to the establishment of a farm and forestry operations security special fund to provide grants for losses to farms and forestry operations due to weather conditions. Last year they only were able to log something about 3 days or something because lack of adequate ground conditions and things like that. So there may be economic and commercial developments related to that.
For judiciary, sorry, H223 is actually one that Rep. Arsenault and I had worked on together because I had submitted a CAR kind of like digital kind of like data access bill, and she had submitted a domestic violence tracking went into the stalking statute. So there's potential right now it's going into the stalking statute, but there's technical requirements of CAR technology as when it comes to data that they might have to edit the bill, and then it would become like more of a consumer protection bill, which is what I had originally submitted. So they're trying to navigate that. And then in energy and digital, they're continuing to work on the bill I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, which was the energy transition report. And then they're also looking at just what agency of digital services as far as like more of a transparent reporting mechanism for their IT projects. So
I've got Ways and Means, and it's less what they're doing that we're interested in them, but more that they're interested in what we're doing. And in particular, they're curious about how we're going to come down on the TIF Spark hit issue. TIF and TIF alternate, also by Michael submitted an alternate TIF. So there's a number of options that are floating in there. They're just curious where we're going to come down with that. And I believe I'm going to have a meeting with them early next week to discuss that. So I hope we have some answers, at some point. Yeah.
Michael, do you have a committee report?
So I spoke to my counterpart, and she indicated that there was nothing that she thought would correspond except for, it's not maybe elections, but I didn't think that was the case. However, I'm looking on here, and it looks like they were discussing an act to professions and occupations regulated by the Office of Professional Regulation. So that's probably gonna touch us somehow. That would be my guess. I haven't looked at it.
Okay.
I apologize.
Yeah, if you can get some more information. I know they're. Yeah, I'm connecting with Aaron about the work, the education, continuing the oh my gosh, loan forgiveness for teachers. So I'm just trying to see if they're even looking at that.
Yeah.
They're kind of heads down in education reform.
Yeah, we're gonna be there right with them.
Yeah.
Anything else? Great. Oh, thank you. Kurt? I have a question about next week. It's just a good time to bring it up. So I think Wednesday, I think you said, we're gonna have a committee meeting on budget kinds of issues.
Yeah, we're gonna hear a little bit more. We need to hear from Working Land.
Right.
Then we'll have a discussion, try to formulate our thoughts on our letter to approach. Wednesday morning in the afternoon, Rick will come in and we'll actually have him write the letter.
Right. I'm thinking about doing my homework kind of thing, over the weekend. We've heard a lot of people come in, with requests and things like that. Is any, I can go back over my notes and try to make a list, but is anyone,
So-
there's a budget, obviously.
Anna Grace has something that she's been taking notes as we've been having those
Okay.
discussions.
There we go.
And
That's
so-
what I was
and
hoping
it-
for.
And she has it posted.
Oh, she has,
posted.
okay, I'm sorry.
In the budget folder that you have.
Yeah.
Okay,
That
sorry.
would be very helpful.
I'll dip into that over the
We can
weekend.
or just send it to everybody.
Thank you.
There used to be a spreadsheet that we could pull our things out of, and they
Right.
didn't create one
Right.
this year.
Yeah, I remember seeing something like that in the past.
So
We
would
build
have
our
to-
own.
We would have to build our own, which I'm not sure which one of us has the time to do that.
Correct, so this would be great. This would be super, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, we're on the floor at 9:30, back here 10 minutes after the floor. Then we can hear from them, we can back. Okay, page 137, we'll hear from the healthcare advocate on the Medigap piece that we're thinking about doing. And then, what else? Had it up on my.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, so we're learning internet law. Yeah, and Carolyn Weir will be here. Probably more of a discussion on the needs bill. Okay. think that's it. Back at 10 minutes after the floor, and it doesn't look like the floor is gonna be very long.
Yeah.
And then maybe after we hear from Mike Fisher, we'll have some committee discussion on 137. As we gear up to get that ready to move next week. And, plans are for the following week and then the week after we come back from